I wanted to be the district attorney because I wanted to serve my community in a way that my skill set applied, and I felt like I could make them safer. But because I was part of the LGBTQ community, until 2008, we had never held any type of major municipal, county, or state position. When Anise Parker was elected mayor, first openly gay mayor of a major metropolitan city, I knew I could run. And the only job I wanted to run for was DA. Unfortunately, Mike Anderson became the district's attorney and died of cancer shortly thereafter, and that actually was the opening that I then ran for. I was defeated in 2014 by Mike's wife, Devin Anderson, who was appointed, and I continued to run until I defeated her in 2016, and I've been the district attorney since January 1st, 2017.
Fantastic.
I'll be the only two-term DA in this century.
First, I want to thank you for doing this interview for Equal Justice Now. I really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate the mission of Equal Justice Now and the action that you've taken, not just since George Floyd, but I know you've been dedicated all your life to positive change in our justice system. So thank you, Tony Smith.
Thank you. I want to ask you, who is Kim Ogg, the DA?
I am a native Houstonian who loves my city and wants to protect people from crimes that can not just harm them, but change their lives forever. So when it comes to violent crime, because my mother was a crime victim, I am violently opposed to that kind of activity, and we use an evidence-based system to prosecute violent criminals. But there are lots of people who come through the justice system who are not violent criminals, who are making bad judgments, who are violating laws that they may disagree with, and sometimes who are victims of civil rights violations. Those are the kinds of things that need to be dealt with differently in the justice system. And so Kim Ogg, the DA, has set out to focus on violent offenders and holding them accountable by dealing with nonviolent criminals in a more humane and effective way that promotes fairness and confidence in our system, that we know how to distinguish between people who choose to do really evil, violent things and those who are simply trying to get through their lives, but sometimes through addiction or mental health issues, just continue to intersect with the law in a negative way. Those are the folks we're trying to keep out of the system.
Absolutely. Did a little background. Your dad was in the Senate and the House here in Houston. I'm sure he'd be very proud of you from his standpoint.
Thank you. So my father was a state representative and state senator, and my mother was by his side the whole time. They were very prolific when it came to trying to bring change to our community by changing the law. Example, Jack Ogg carried no smoking legislation. Very unpopular. Now it's the way we look at things, as though they've always been that way, that non-smokers had as much rights as smokers. But back in the day, when Jack was in the legislature, it wasn't so. So that's a major thing that has changed in our community because of my folks. He also worked with the equal rights movement leaders to carry the ERA in Texas, so he believed women could and should be treated equally in pay and every other way. And those are the kinds of values politically that shaped me. But it was really my parents' service that I admired the most. They got poorer, not richer, as public servants, and they helped a lot of people through their service. And that's what I ended up doing. Although the reason I ended up running for office is because years ago I said, I will never, ever be in politics. And it turns out God has a long memory and a wicked sense of humor. So here I am, a lawyer like my father, and in politics like my parents.
Is your son Jack gonna run for office, you think?
You know, he says he's not, but I pity him. He's got the DNA by osmosis, if nothing else. He's my partner's biological son, and I've been his other mother since birth. And so we'll see about nurture and nature and how it comes together. But it could easily lead to public service.
Absolutely. So you've had this office for 7.5 years. Do you think you've been effective?
I know we've been effective. It's a very different system than when we started. This office, for example, paid expenses through physical checks typed out on a typewriter. We not only brought it into the 21st century by turning it paperless, not just for our accountants, but for our lawyers. We focused our efforts first on diversifying the staff, which had been primarily non-diverse most of the 37 years that I've practiced, and back then most of the 30 that I'd practiced. So we focused on bringing in more lawyers that looked like Houston. I think that's important for coworkers, that's important for jurors, and it's important for the public. I didn't want us to be a white majority office anymore. It's bad for people's confidence in the system when it doesn't look like them. Secondly, we focused on evidence-based approaches, not relationship-based decisions, who their defense lawyer was, or who is charged, or who is the judge, and what is our relationship to them. We focused our lawyers strictly on the evidence. And in prosecution, you either have the evidence to move forward with a criminal case, or you don't. And it's important to have the courage to make those decisions that are necessary when you finally get to the end of the evidence collection and see what you've got. And so judgment at the end of the day is what we're trying to impart to our prosecutors. These are not new concepts, but we really focused on it. And the difference is you have a DA's office with a different perspective and attitude now. And as a result, we see a lot of diversion into programs we created that don't lead to a conviction. That was important to us. Separate out the nonviolent folks and try and work with them. And we have a group of prosecutors that is simultaneously, they are dedicated to crime victims, especially victims of violent crime and the next of kin of murder victims, folks who are killed by DWI drivers, etc. I'd say we have a very empathetic staff with an ear to crime victims because we're their last voice.
Well, that's good. I've been following your career for the past 7 years, and I know that you're big on victims and you're big on mental health. Can you tell us about your mental health program that you have here?
I can. Our mental health diversion program is pre-charge. This is really a big difference and change. In the past, prior to this administration, about 4,000 people went to jail each year for homelessness. They were charged with trespass, but almost all were homeless, and we found a significant number of them had mental illness. How did we know that? They had been treated by Harris County before. And so by working with government officials, namely County Judge Ed Emmett, we were able to have access to the Mental Health Authority, and now known as the Harris Center for IDD, and we had access to their leadership. And so we crafted a program with police that allowed them to take homeless, mentally ill trespassers, people making a problem for businesses, convenience stores, gas stations, small family businesses, even big businesses sleeping in their parking lots. It allowed us to provide treatment for these offenders instead of jail. And what we saw is when they went to jail, they came back to jail. They were immediately released. They'd go back and trespass, often at the same location where they'd been a nuisance, and everyone was frustrated. And those individuals were not getting treatment. Our program allowed the police, when they came in contact with those kinds of individuals and the complaints against them, to take them directly to the Harris Center for IDD, to the Ed Emmett Mental Health Diversion Center, where they're provided an immediate stabilizing environment, coffee, a shower, a bed, and they can stay there for up to several weeks, as some have. And what we saw is an immediate reduction in recidivism among those populations. And with an overcrowded jail, this was a money saver for local government, but most importantly, it kept these mentally ill folks out of our jail and in treatment, which is what makes everything better. And at the end of the day, our public wants us, their elected leaders, to solve their problems, not to give it lip service, but to solve the problem. So we have a significant homeless population in Houston, but they are not living inside our jail. They are being treated when they come into contact with police officers. They are now being treated by mental health professionals. That's a big difference. And we have people from all over the country coming to look at this pre-charge program. Again, pre-charge means even though the cops were called and came out and arrested them, these mentally ill, mostly homeless individuals did not go to jail. They went to treatment. Yay for a great program that really works. And we hope the rest of the country will follow suit.
I was able to take a tour of the facility, and I was very impressed.
Thank you.
And I'm told that you're one of the reasons why it is a success today. Just walking through the facility, able to meet the staff and some of the people that are there and how they intake them, impressive.
They're dedicated. The folks who work for Harris Health, dedicated to improving the mental health condition of Houstonians. God bless them. And as you know, a leader is only as good as the people that work with them and for them. And so I owe my success in this program to our staff, starting with Denise Onken, who pioneered how we now prosecute mentally ill offenders, from the very violent to the completely nonviolent. And a big part of the solution was getting these nonviolent offenders out of the mix, because we do have mentally ill people who sometimes murder others, injure them gravely, hurt themselves, and those individuals can't be processed in the average way in our justice system. They require different levels of proof depending on their mental capacity, and they almost always require some kind of competency or sanity evaluation. It's the poorest built of all the courthouses, but it's better. It's better than being 3 miles away. Our people had to ride the bus back and forth. And so getting rid of the paper files and the boxes that they had to take, that was a big deal.
This building flooded.
Mm-hmm. And we were out of it for 5 years. They had the courts.
How do you flood a building this size?
The sprinkler system went off and flooded all 20 floors. And nobody was here to watch the farm. And it did a tremendous amount of damage. Really, ultimately, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage.
Wow.
Not just to the facility, but it shut the system down.
Right.
We're still dealing with the backlog. I mean, it got up to 153,000 cases.
Really?
Pending at one time with 330 lawyers. I mean, do the math. It's insane.
How long will it take to catch up?
It took us 4 years to get it back down to pre-COVID numbers, about 110,000 cases. We file 100,000 new cases each year. So it's incumbent upon us to clear more cases than we take in. This is the intake division of the DA's office. It's the emergency room of the criminal justice system.
Okay.
Morning. Afternoon now.
How are y'all doing?
We're doing great. Bringing some visitors through. All right. Remember we talked about bail. This is the video room where all probable cause hearings are held. Now, they're actually physically held in the Joint Processing Center. Hey, guys. Hey, everybody. These are the folks who staff intake, everybody. These are police officers here filing charges from different agencies. And these individuals answer questions on the phone. They process some of the paperwork. We have investigators that run the criminal histories of the accused defendants, and our lawyers that are answering phone calls from police on the street are in these back offices. Let's go back there. Everybody okay? Good to see everybody. This is the intake shift chief's office. Hey, Michael. Intake is the heart of the DA's office because this is where all of the charges come. This is where the initial filing decisions are made or rejected. The language is chosen for the indictments. Correct. This is a very fluid process, so it can change dramatically if Michael didn't have the benefit of, for example, DNA evidence or other forensic evidence that needs to be tested. He might decide to charge a crime, one crime here, and then as we get the forensic evidence, our trial court prosecutors might change the charge and end up upping it or upgrading or downgrading depending on the evidence. So we're a fluid office because we're taking things right when they happen. We're taking charges right after they happen if the perpetrator's been caught. And even if the perpetrator hasn't been caught, if they can be identified, we take the charges early on so that the warrant can be issued. It's all about protecting the public.
Absolutely. This is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
All right. You doing okay?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
All right. You'll get out of here one day, I swear. This is our first assistant. This is David Mitchum. And David has been our staunchest defender in bail reform, trying to remind everyone that crime victims and the public safety matters.
Absolutely, yes, for sure.
So what you doing?
Well, on the meeting for
2:30.
Is there's a conflict.
Okay.
That the prosecutor that's assigned, Megan Long, she's in TAG and they're meeting with the FBI at 2 o'clock. She said she could meet either at 1:15 or at 4 if that would be possible.
Let's do,
Or
no, let's do
get word
4.
to us.
Let's
Okay.
do 4. I can always zoom in.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, and I'll get word to her.
Is this Joe Friendly police officer?
This is Joe Friendly, amazing police officer. His PC is awesome.
So, can you explain what it does for police officers?
Intake, they help take charges for police officers. Of course, you got to call and get your charge accepted, and they'll also help with 2B warrants when you put out a warrant for a suspect that's not in custody at the time.
And right now we're going over. There are these 3 people going through Bush Intercontinental garages stealing tons of cars.
Yes, I know about it. So
we're
have
working
we
on
got?
this right now? We're on the how many? This is our third one
Third
today
guy. Third
that
guy.
we're doing. Yeah.
Okay, so if you'll send me the information about those cases, I've been out there. I've been working, wanting to work with you. Are you airport?
Yes.
Are you assigned there?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I get his name and number? Will you send it all to me? Send it all to me.
Okay.
Here's what I need. There was a story a year ago about a guy who crawled inside a wheel well. He was a chronic trespasser, and it was really dangerous. But I'm trying to get the extent, I'm trying to understand the extent of the public safety problem presented by that homeless encampment, wherever it is. Is that ringing a bell?
I know we have a bunch of homeless people in the tunnels. They're living in the actual tunnels of the actual airport. We'll have issues with that here and there.
So I'd like to come out and visit you guys just to get an understanding of what we're dealing with and how much of a threat it really is to the public.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, I'll see you.
That would be super helpful. What's your name?
Daniel Davila.
Great. Davila. Kim Ogg. Nice to see you. So that's a problem we've had for a year that I've wanted to get on top of, and I can't figure out really how bad our problem is at the airport, but it seems pretty bad. This guy was, hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. This is our first assistant's daughter.
Hi.
The unglamorous jobs, never let it be said that nepotism pays, because it definitely does not. You doing all right, Susanna?
Yeah, how are you?
Good. Hi, Desiree.
Hello.
Desiree is our chief,
Division manager.
yes, division manager for all the admins that work at intake. So she covers 365, 24/7 coverage of admins. God bless you. Can I get you some coffee? I don't think he's here. He's not. Hey, this is the chief when he's not here. This is Michelle Wilhelm. Tony Smith.
Michelle Wilhelm, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
She does research. Let's say we get a call about a drone. There's a drone near my house. I made this call. Give me the law on drones. What can they do and what can't they do? What's legal, what's not? So she researched it. They had the same problem out at the chemical plants in Deer Park. That's a big problem. And so they went and trained all of the security in Deer Park, in that refinery area, about the law on drones, what was acceptable and what wasn't. Wow. So we also, in addition to taking every officer's charges in Harris County, they provide legal counsel to all of the law enforcement agencies. Now, it's not like general counsel. They're not advising them on personal cases, but we provide general outlines and explanations of the law.
Nice, nice.
So anything not run-of-the-mill.
If it's weird, Michelle Wilhelm's getting it.
That's right.
All right, see you.
Let me ask you a question. When you hear the name George Soros, what comes to mind?
Well, he funded my successful opponent in the last primary election. And I see the interjection of a billionaire's desire to reform justice into local politics in a way that's having mixed results for America. I'm against influencing local races with millions of dollars to affect a political victory, when criminal justice reform is going to have to be done from inside the system if it's going to be sustainable. So just replacing me with a more progressive speaking DA is not going to work unless that nominee wins and does things that are truly more progressive. And in truth, we're very fortunate to have affected as many progressive programs as we have. So to be the subject of a lot of money injected into my local race doesn't sit well with me, and I see it around the country. I see some of my fellow prosecutors who were supported by George Soros having been removed, having been indicted, having been targeted politically. So I don't think it's been a good thing. I understand there was probably a good motive to reform criminal justice, but doing it through politics has had a nasty whiplash effect. And I think some of the lack of public safety that you see in America is being blamed directly on George Soros's DAs. Some of it they own, some of it we don't.
Criminal justice reform and bail reform has been a hot topic for the last few years. And you look at cities like Los Angeles, Sacramento, Chicago, Connecticut, and they've tried, New York, have tried to enact criminal justice reform, bail reform. Why hasn't it worked?
It has compromised our public safety. I know justice reformers don't want to hear that, but bail reform is a term of art, not of law, which means it's all about the details. As they say, the devil is in the details. So the villainization of the bail industry, for example, is the wrong starting point. In actuality, the bail bondsmen have been part of the public safety network and net for decades. When I didn't know as a line prosecutor where a defendant was if he was on bond and he failed to show up in court, I didn't call the Marshal's Service or the Warrant Division of the Sheriff's Department. I called the bondsman, who had generally much better luck in getting their client immediately back into court. If I'd gone to the Marshals, it would go in a stack of warrants that might never be served or might be served but not for some time. And so I relied upon the bondsman to return the defendant to court. And they had a financial interest, and so it worked in synchronicity. And it worked to the public's benefit, kept everybody safer. This type of bail reform that's being implemented, where they've villainized the bondsman and blamed you for a racially inequitable system, is just wrong. There's a lot about the system that's racially unfair, but bond per se is not unfair. It's based on a person's risk of not returning to court and their risk to the community. And that's to be balanced with their individual right to defend themselves while awaiting trial and their right to be presumed innocent. And yet, that presumption of innocence isn't supposed to factor into how much bail is set. And that job is entirely owned by the judges and the judiciary. In current bail reform cities, we see judiciary very frustrated. Judges saying, I would impose a high bond if the law allowed me because this individual is so dangerous and it's so risky that he won't return to court. But in New York State, their hands are tied. In many of the areas in California, their hands are tied. And so you see it in Illinois. Cash bail has been eliminated. Houston is really ground zero. We have a hybrid system. And in part, that's because as DA, I fought to keep cash bond for violent offenders because I would not agree that everybody should be released on their own promise to return, especially violent offenders. If you know human nature, and anybody who's raised a child knows it, you're just safer having somebody supervise a person who's out on bond than for it to go to an unsupervised type of situation. And right now, our pretrial services who are in charge of monitoring those individuals on jail, they can't even tell me how many people are on ankle monitors, much less how many people they're trying to supervise on bail. We estimate it's around 35,000. There's just no way any single department can do that. And that's why we used to rely on the bondsman. So we have more recidivism since bail reform has been implemented in this way than we used to. That means repeat offenders. That means people getting out even for murder and murdering again. And that gives all of criminal justice reform a bad name, and it shouldn't. But it's the way bail reform is being implemented. So in theory, it's great. In practice, you gotta run it correctly, and you can't exclude the bondsman from the picture.
Why do you think that some think that you should exclude the bondsman?
Because race has been injected by pro-reformers on the radical end of reform. And I think anytime race is injected into a topic, you get an incendiary response. We're all mad about racism, or we should be. But excluding the idea that people's actions over a period of time matter is not the answer to racism. And if you exclude a person's past criminal behavior from the equation about whether or not they should be held with bail or not, bail is just skin in the game. Bail is somebody has to put up money for them or they have to put up their own money. And that's supposed to be a factor to keep us safer while they're on bail because they know they're risking something. Whether it's really a deterrent to further violent behavior, I don't have the definitive answer to that, but I can say that without bail, we've seen a huge increase in violence by people who are on bail, but not cash bail, on their own recognizance. They just don't seem to respect that designation as much as having skin in the game, meaning their mother put up her house, their girlfriend put up $10K cash, or they themselves had to do something in terms of securing their word that they would return to court.
Can you walk us through the process once somebody's arrested to the time they're magistrated to the time for release?
Yes. A citizen calls in a crime. A car's being burglarized. Cops come. Defendant's at the scene, arrested with glass on his hands, the burglar tool, and maybe the computer that he stole or the gun he stole in his backpack. All right. District Attorney's Office is contacted. Applying the law to the facts, we say, yes, we'll accept burglary of a motor vehicle criminal charge. Cop says, great, DA, thanks. Heads to jail. Now, it's a processing center, not the actual jail. And a defendant charged with a misdemeanor like burglary of a motor vehicle can't be held there for more than 24 hours without being released as a matter of law. A felon charged with murder even can't be held longer than 48 hours at this holding facility without having charges pressed and going on to the magistrate. So due process is built into our system. Everybody charged with a misdemeanor or felony is going to get to a magistrate to have a bond set or be referred to the higher court within 24 or 48 hours. So that's a really good thing in our system. Once the bond is set by the magistrate, that person can post bond, they're given a new court date, and they appear in court, plead guilty or not guilty at something we call the arraignment setting. And that's just your first appearance in court. After that, there's an exchange of evidence between the prosecutors and the defense. It often goes on for a long period of time because the labs are backed up. There's always a delay in the gathering of evidence because we have such great volume here in Harris County, and our system remains chronically underfunded. And so labs are slow. That makes the evidence exchange slow. That means cases build up in the courts. And it's a problem both for people in jail and the victims out on the street. And if you have victims on the street who've lost a child or someone to a violent crime, they can get extremely frustrated and traumatized by the fact that their loved one's murderer is out on bond for 3, 4, 5 years. It's really rough, and we can't diminish the secondary impact on either side of delay. And yet our system's full of it. So after a person's been to an arraignment setting, there's a series of settings in court until the person decides one of three things. Either their case is going to be dismissed by the prosecutor because they've reached an agreement for an alternative sentence, or because the person's innocent, or finally the state just can't prove its case. Or instead of dismissal, the state can make the case a defendant has two choices: plead guilty or plead not guilty and ask for a trial. The trials take a really long time to get to, but everybody has that right, and we promote, if a person thinks they're not guilty and wants to plead not guilty, we want our prosecutors going to trial. We don't want them trying to argue with folks or give them a better deal to get them to plead. We want to give everybody their right to a trial. And we also want to give them their right to a plea bargain, because there's usually a good deal involved. Why? It keeps the victim's family out of court. Oftentimes we can settle the dispute through restitution or some other repayment by the offender. Or finally, we just want to move the case because we have so many other cases to get to. Over 100,000 a year right here in Houston. So that's how a system goes. It's really fast right up until you get to court, and then there's a lot of waiting time, unfortunately. And that's got to be where our focus is with courts, to reduce that amount of time.
We at Eco Justice now, we've traveled the country the last few years, and we've done town hall discussions with, the mayors from different cities, district attorneys, prosecutors, defense attorneys, Black Lives Matter people. And there's a misconception that some may say, well, the bondsman decides the amount of the bond, and they're in charge of that. Can you clear that up for us?
I can easily clear it up. Bail is 100% the responsibility of judges. Because bail can be controversial, oh, they only set the bail at $1. Oh my gosh, $1 million bond was set. Judges do not publicize the fact that they are responsible for supervising people while on bail. They don't advertise that they set the bail, but in truth, it's 100% the responsibility of the judiciary. For the first 4 years of my administration, we had a police union leader who openly lied on a daily basis about the DA's office responsibility for bail. He would personally blame me for the setting of bond, too low or too high, every time it was discussed. That was nothing more than a political attack, but it really confused the public, who doesn't understand our assembly line process of criminal justice, who really is unaware that we all depend on each other. The police depend on the prosecutors depend on the judges depend on the probation department, the penitentiaries, depend on their employees to keep both inmates and guards safe. And so there's a series of interrelated disciplines and employment sectors that employ a lot of people in our country, because we unfortunately have many people who go through the justice system in our country. And so it's really important and hard for the public at the same time to know the rules. But that's what we have to improve through interviews and sessions just like this, letting the public know judges set bail, not DAs and not bondsmen.
Deputy Esqueda was a 5-year Harris County Sheriff's Office veteran. He served on the Violent Persons Warrant Task Force, and as we reported, he was tragically killed while protecting the community on July 11th.
And he went over to visit Mr. Palmer, said, wait a second, I think I have lowered this, but I won't wait until Monday morning, which is now we've had Mr. Ham having visited our client, but they didn't discuss the facts of the case.
Well, let me introduce one of the prosecutors, Chris Condon. There's 3 on it. You've seen Jamie Burr, you've seen Chandler Rainey, and this is Chris Condon. So Chris was representing us this morning. It was another hearing about the second defendant, Dre Francis. Dre Francis was a neighbor and friend through girlfriends of Ronnie Palmer, and is charged in this case with capital murder and tampering. And what the prosecutor did today was ask for a proof evident hearing, which is a de facto way of saying we're seeking the death penalty at this time, and we need a hearing to be able to hold the defendant without bond. And that's what our prosecutor did. That was granted. A hearing has been set, but there's a keep separate order among the defendants, so we anticipate that the settings will be on different dates.
So you are seeking a death penalty?
At this time we are. We have to make a preliminary announcement. As everyone knows, these cases change. The investigation is ongoing. Mr. Condon and other prosecutors were at the grand jury yesterday. I think that the victim's family was very adamant about these defendants being held without bond. They're a law enforcement family. I think they understand the threat that anybody who would shoot a deputy this many times poses to the community. They don't want to endanger any other families.
I have another question, and you may or may not have the answer to this. How do we get law enforcement and the community to have a better relationship?
Law enforcement's got to be more transparent. Body cams were supposed to address that. The community needs to be more interactive and understand their police department's responsibilities better. Their responsibilities don't include mental health treatment. Their responsibilities don't include drug treatment. They're there to keep us safe. So to blame them for the failures of a system to not have enough treatment programs is wrong.
Do you think that the criminal justice reform has worked here in Houston?
Parts of it have. I think for mental health, we've made huge improvements. Our effort to keep people out of the system for minor offenses, which leaves them in the labor force, has been successful. We've seen a huge increase in violent crime that started slightly before COVID, but was really exacerbated during that time, and our homicide numbers are still high. So I think we've got a ways to go. That, again, at the low end, criminal justice has really worked and kept people out of the system and helped get them to treatment, keep them in their jobs. but I think that victims are suffering in Houston from a wave of violent crime that's not over yet. And it's going to take more effort at tempering how our judges set bail. That's probably the single most important factor when it comes to reducing violent crime.
Can you talk a little bit about the militarization of the police department here in Houston?
You know, the military's role is to fight an identified enemy of our nation. The role of police departments is to protect our communities. And yet, police agencies are set up in a paramilitary fashion. They have a group of officers that are the same as infantry. They have a group of officers above them, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, all named after military positions. And they both give directives through direct orders, they have general orders. So there's a lot of comparisons, and yet their goals are completely different. I think the militarization of the police refers to an attitude that we fear police are adopting, us versus them, when really it's just us with us. Can we protect each other? We want to support you cops in protecting us, and cops, we need you to protect us without violating our civil rights and harming us. And so it's a difficult balance. And that's why the more interaction you have with the community, the more transparency you have, whether it's through body-worn cameras or whether it's through community activity. I personally prefer community-based policing, the concept of, Officer Good Guy that knows the friendlies in the neighborhood and works together to keep the neighborhood safe. That's not an old-fashioned concept. It's a part of modern policing, but unfortunately, it's often rejected for the more pro-military, heavy weaponization, heavy aggressive policies, that kind of thing when it comes to crime suppression. For us to hold police accountable for civil rights violations, that's also a responsibility of the community. And I think if we work together more on those two things, what police really are supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do, our community might have a better understanding of not just the problems they face, but the responsibilities they have. And I think police would be more open to a community that was trying to interact with them instead of criticizing them 100% of the time. And I think often they feel that way. And we get a divergence between white America that, support the thin blue line and black America that says we've lived in a different criminal justice system and legal system all of our lives. Both are right. We have to work together for change. And so I think we've got a ways to go. There needs to be a cultural shift in policing that's more community-oriented, and we've got to get our community off social media and out there with Officer Friendly so that we can work together to solve this public safety issue that has always existed since the beginning of mankind. We need policing, unfortunately.
So I'm guilty of looking at too much social media. And I see a lot of police interaction with the community. Time and time again, I see where law enforcement will say, get out the car, or they'll put a gun to somebody's head without, in my opinion, just cause. How can we change that? I mean, what does it take? I mean, is it procedure to have somebody get out the car? I know you're not a police officer, but I know you deal with a lot of those interactions a lot of times, and it gets kind of...
As you know, this office prosecutes civil rights violations aggressively, and we've prosecuted a number of police officers for murder after a preceding 20 years of no officer being even indicted for a crime as serious as murder. We've had a hard time getting convictions. The public is very empathetic, and judges make rulings oftentimes that we wish were more evidence-based and less political. They face union criticism as well from police union leaders, and they don't like it because they're elected. And so these things play into our inability as a society to hold officers who commit crimes responsible. That makes the public so frustrated, especially our African American communities. They feel like it's two systems of justice. And I think in large degree they're right when it comes to civil rights violations. But we're seeing more acceptance of the responsibility that leadership has in training police officers better, and we're seeing it through civil judgments against entire cities when a single cop violates a person's rights, like in George Floyd, like in Breonna Taylor. So I think that when you incentivize cities by punishing them for failure to adequately train their police officers to deal with people that they're arresting in a more humane way and in a safe way, that's on the cities and the department leadership. And if a person's really violent as a police officer, then that's on them too, and they ought to be held accountable. We don't like when judges make rulings that are adverse to the prosecution. We understand they can happen, but in these police cases where it's really obvious that the court is taking a side, that's wrong, and that hurts our community. It might help that judge politically, but it hurts our community because everybody should be accountable under the law, including cops and prosecutors. So you got to have equal enforcement, you got to have better support by the judiciary, and our community needs to be reasonable. Not every cop who shoots someone was unreasonable. Not every cop who put a gun to somebody's head was unreasonable. You got to take things one case at a time. And I think our country's really quick, and our public, especially our social media involved public, you know, they want the 30-second answer. Bada boom, bada bang, everything's great. That's just not life. And I think having real solutions takes a lot of time and a whole lot of work. And it's got to be funded by government leadership that's dedicated to positive change.
7.5 years into the job, top 3 accomplishments.
If you have a government that's more dedicated to lining its own pockets than to positive change, that's a massive issue, not just locally where dollars being spent should be improving the community but are instead being stolen by folks working within the government. I think that debilitates the public's trust in government's ability to accomplish anything. So major accomplishment, public corruption prosecution. That charge alone makes people really angry. Public corruption, you mean somebody stole my tax dollars or somebody used their position to abuse another person? And that's exactly what public corruption is. So as we've pursued government employees and public officials who violated certain types of transparency laws, fraud, lying on documents, I think that gives the public faith that, hey, at least there's a watchdog trying to keep everybody in government honest. And I think it is a strong message to those in government who might be interested in their own, in lining their own pockets or that of their friends from doing so. So our prosecution of water department employees that created shell companies to perform the services needed and then paid themselves extraordinarily, you know, we're against that. The public hates that. We just prosecuted a tax increment reinvestment zone that was supposed to be serving the 3rd Ward in our city for the last 15 years by building affordable housing. Instead, a lot of money got spent and very little affordable housing got spent. And that's because, again, government appointees and employees were pocketing the money by directing it to shell companies that didn't perform the work and were owned by them. So this type of thievery really disheartens the American public, makes them not want to vote, makes them not want to like politics or run for anything. This is bad. We need each other. Democracy is a participating sport. You have to get involved. You got to go vote at a minimum. We need good people to run. So I think that that focus has been important. Secondly, crime victims' rights. We passed a law through the legislature by supporting it. They passed it. But it's a law called Jenny's Law that prevents crime victims from being jailed as witnesses without their due process. Now, the thought of jailing a victim at all is really severe, and the only way under the law it can be done is where they're a material witness. But one of the cases that helped me win my first election in 2016 was a case where our DA supported her local prosecutor in jailing a rape victim, and that person was left in jail for 30 plus days. She was abused in jail. She had a mental health issue that was greatly harmed and exacerbated by her time in jail. And this was done for the purpose of convicting a serial rapist, a good purpose, but at too great a cost to the crime victim. There were other opportunities and ways of dealing with it. So I think making sure that crime victims get their due process and their day in court is really important, and that's been a big success story. And third would be our diversion programs, both for mental health and for simple possession of marijuana, keeping those people out of our system. And we did so by working with police, not just by telling them, we're not going to prosecute these crimes. That's what's failing in other George Soros-sponsored DAs' cities. They're encouraged to cut the police out of the equation and just tell them unilaterally, we're not going to prosecute certain crimes. I didn't do that. I wanted our programs to last. We have 86 different agencies here. They have about 14,000 police that work the streets. It's not that we got every one of them to believe in the program, but we got every one of them to use the programs. And as the program's success became obvious, takes less time now. Police are not wasting 4 hours booking a guy for a joint or a roach of marijuana. They're instead focused on the crimes our public wants them to be focused on, which are violent crimes and property crimes. And I think with mental health, the police would tell you, even the hardest core police, it did no good to put them in jail over and over because they just got out. It's done a lot of good to take them to the Ed Emmett mental health diversion program because they don't come back. And I think those are really big successes that were made possible because we diversified the office, because we brought it into the 21st century through technology, but mostly because a whole lot of really great people chose to work here and serve our public.
We were in a city last year, and we were posed with somebody from the panel who wanted to defund the police. And, you know, we at EJN, we don't support that. We support the police. And so, but it was so sad, I'm going to say, that there were people that in that city that really wanted to and felt very strongly about getting rid of the police. I'm not so sure in my lifetime, in our lifetime, that we will see that racism does not play a part in profiling someone when you pull them over. You think we'll be able to overcome that?
Here's why I know we can overcome it. When you make evidence-based decisions, whether you're a police officer or a prosecutor, that is action-based. Either the person did or did not use their blinker, right? And you either have a reason to pull them over or you don't. So objective actions that can be cataloged through dash cameras, through body cameras, give us a better idea of why a policeman interacts with the community to begin with. And I think we need a lot more positive interaction with our community. Officer Friendly needs to stop, even though it's 150 degrees here in Houston, roll down the window, get out of the car, and talk to Mrs. Smith to find out how she's doing, because she can tell you who's not doing right on her block. That's valuable intelligence to police, and we ignore it because we don't want to get out of our cars. That's just being lazy. So I think that all of this can be overcome, even racism in policing, if we are objective in our reasoning. And when the community sees those films, instead of picking them apart, take what you see, if it's valid, at face value. If the officer says he pulled somebody over because they didn't use their blinker, and the film shows that the individual didn't use their blinker, get off the cop's back. He had an objective reason for stopping the person. On the other hand, if it turns out to be false, well, then you need to check, is there a pattern with this police officer? Is this a one-off mistake? Or is this what that officer does? And individual conduct is how we run institutions. It's difficult because here there's more than 900 people that do God knows what in my name every day. It's like signing a bunch of blank checks. And that's why it's so important that we appropriately educate and train people about their job and their mission, and try and give them as much support in learning how to make good judgments as possible. Because every judgment in this building has my name on the bottom line. And I want fairness, I want public safety, and that really, when you have 900 people working in your name, that can only happen if you're hiring people who are really dedicated to learning what's fair and just in our justice system. And that is the evidence. And that's what everybody needs to base their decisions on. And so that's what we teach here, that's how we train, and that's how I hope America's prosecutors are making their decisions.